I have an introduction to do tonight, and as I said this morning, I'm so appreciative of the time the cabinet ministers of our BC NDP government have taken to be with us on the rare days during a session that they have the ability to not be in the legislature from dawn to dusk. We have an important topic to discuss tonight, and it's childcare. And I have only this for a qualification to tell a brief story before I introduce the minister. The only qualification I have to speak about childcare is I am a co-parent of 5 children and the grandfather of 3 grandchildren. So that's it. I declare that as my full qualifications. And I tell this one brief story. So tonight I'll put it this way. I'll tell a brief story about childcare in a micro sense, and then the minister can talk to us in a macro or provincial sense. So in a micro sense, I'm going to tell a story about an amazing woman, my partner, Amber Hawken, and she was at one point, about a decade or so ago, the Pacific Region Director of the Canadian Labour Congress, which meant part of her duties were to be the Chancellor of the CLC Winter School here at Harrison. And when she got that opportunity, the very first thing she did at the first winter school was she brought in an early childhood educator and made sure there was child care available for union activists to come to Harrison. And what I witnessed, and I want to refer to Minister Robinson, who said sometimes we just need to get things done. She didn't make great fanfare about it. She didn't get into arguments with people. She just moved the dial and she brought it in. And because we were partners, I was with her an awful lot of the time up here, and I heard stories predominantly from women activists, young women activists who were unable to attend winter school, were unable to participate in the broader labor movement because they didn't have the childcare access. And it was a profoundly important thing to do. It's micro, but it shows us the little things we can do whenever we have the opportunity. And I can't think of anybody better now to talk to us about the macro level of childcare in the province than an amazing activist for children in our province, the Honourable Katrina Chen, Minister of State for Childcare.
Thank you so much for that introduction after the really amazing poetry reading. I was getting really nervous because I was like, sorry, I'm not going to swear. English is not my first language. How am I going to be able to follow that? But you know what? The only place I can follow that is at Columbia Institute, because we believe everyone, whether if my English is native or not, whether if that English is my second language, we all have the opportunity to make a speech. So thank you. But I have to say, Jeremy, that was amazing, and I'm still a little nervous following you. And I really want to begin by recognizing that we're gathering here on the traditional territories of the Stahelis and the Stolo First Nations, and thank them for sharing their land with us where we can learn together. And it is really amazing to come back here, seeing a lot of familiar faces, a lot of friends that I've worked with in the community for many years, and also some new faces. A lot of you that I met today at the childcare working group. Sorry, that's our cabinet working group. My apologies. Again, I'm ESL, please forgive me. It was the workshop that we have this afternoon. By the way, kudos to the BIPOC meeting that's happening tomorrow morning. Yeah. And it's really amazing also to come back here to join this conference again, because I remember the first time I came here as a school trustee. I saw the information about this amazing conference, Columbia Institute, coming to Harrison in March. Of course I'm going to be here. I hope that's not the only reason that you're here. But I came here and I feel that I learned so much from a lot of colleagues from all over the province, sharing ideas, creative ways to support our communities. And I think the most important thing that I learned when I was a school trustee coming to this conference was that I feel so empowered. I feel like even though I was new to the school board, I can make a difference. Because of those stories that you shared, those ideas that you shared, I'm able to take it back to my community and make a difference. And I really feel encouraged and empowered. So I really want to give a big hand to all the organizers and all the volunteers of this High Ground Conference to thank you. Thank you for bringing us all together here. And I really want to thank all the staff for working hard for this conference. And I have my staff, Chantil, who is here with me, and I thank you for being here. We are very fortunate to be able to work with so many great, amazing colleagues. I see my colleague, Selena Robinson, Minister of Housing. I heard that you did a great speech today. Sorry, I was driving when you were making the speech, but thank you. And also Minister of Agriculture, Lana Poppin, for being here today. And I cannot tell you how thankful I am to be able to work with so many amazing colleagues like you. And Lana, thank you for your hard work for agricultural this week. She had a really tough question period, but she did an amazing job. Let's give her a big hand. And it was my grassroots experience working in the community and also having the honor, and I'm very thankful to be here today, but it was also because I had the opportunity to serve as a local school trustee that brought me into provincial politics at the end. Well, hopefully not the end, but I mean, that brought me to provincial politics. But I remember when we started this work 2 years ago, or less than 2 years ago, and it was the time when there was so little conversation and so little solution or dialogue about how can we solve all the crises that we were facing in this province at the time. The cost of housing, the cost of childcare, the cost of transportation, our environment, the struggles that families are having with day to day in our communities, that there was so many little coordinated approach to bring those conversations together and find solutions. And families were barely getting by. But I believe that in the past less than 2 years, we have been working hard every single day to look at the solutions, and not just looking at the solutions and having dialogues, but also making sure we have been acting on some of the key issues on housing, on childcare, on poverty reduction, to make sure that we're making some progress for British Columbian families. And we understand there's still a lot of work to do. I feel like we've been making a lot of progress, but there's so much catch-up work to do. And I think you would agree that in order to solve all the issues that we were talking about, we need to do it together. We need to work hard together to make life more affordable for British Columbians. We need to make sure we provide better services and also investing in local economy and investing in good local jobs. And at the same time, to break the glass ceiling, to smash that glass ceiling and to create a more equitable society for all women and all men and all children in our family, in our communities. And while there's a lot of work to do and we have a lot of goals, a lot of things that we have to work hard on, but all the things that I just mentioned, making life more affordable, better services, and making an equitable workforce and a community, all those things have one thing in common. That is, none of them are achievable without bringing in a universal childcare system for BC families. And in my travel across the province, I cannot tell you how many parents who have come to us and talk about their childcare struggles. And most of them, and I have to say, probably 99.9% of them are women. Mothers who have no choices, not because they don't want to, but they just don't have choices. When the cost of childcare is so high, when they are really struggling to continue with their professional goals, their career, and they don't have a choice to make the ends meet when they're struggling with high cost of childcare or not even able to access childcare services at all. And at the same time, when you look into this current workforce of early childhood educators, 97% of early childhood educators are women. They're women who are working low-paying jobs with little support and with very little recognition. So sometimes when I hear those stories and hear their struggles, especially when I hear single mothers have a good paying job, but because of their childcare needs and not having any family support, that they have to live in poverty, those heartbreaking stories, I always ask myself this question. This is 2019. This is 2019. And why do childcare responsibilities still fall heavily on women in our communities? And it's really not okay, because I think it's important to say childcare is definitely a women's rights issue, but it should not be a women's issue, it should not be a mother's issue, it should be a community issue that we're working together to make sure that we're investing in childcare because it's good for early learning for our young children, especially before the age of 5. Think about that. That's when their brain develops the fastest. That's the crucial time to be able to support their early learning, especially children who require extra support, children who are born in poverty. Those are the crucial years to be able to give them that important and equitable start. I love you. I love this crowd. And investing in childcare is also really good for parents, as I mentioned, because when they're struggling with affordability, not being able to return to work, investing in childcare is crucial for parents to have their professional career and educational opportunities so they can invest in our economy. It is good for our economy so we can create good local jobs and be able to retain and recruit workers in our community so families don't have to move further and further away or move out of our province. But speaking of that we all agree on how investing in childcare is good for children, good for families, good for our economy, but let's talk about that expectation of women, the expectation of women having to bear the brunt of childcare responsibilities. That is unacceptable, and unfortunately that's something I also have some personal experience with, and I see a lot of mothers in this room who may all have a story to share. But I want to share this little story of how growing up, I was born and raised in a very traditional family with a lot of love and support. It's a lot of love and support, but because from generations, the traditional ideas that were passed from the grandparents and great-grandparents, that I was constantly reminded of the difference between a girl and a boy. That how I should dress myself, or the test that I should do, or I'll give you a quick example that I remember the elders in my family will always say, you really need to learn how to cook, because otherwise how are you going to look after your children and husband in the future? And so I was constantly reminded of that. And you know what is interesting? Speaking of how to cook, 20 years later, I found a great solution. My husband is a really good cook. But that was the conversation that I had with my family, and I always struggle with, like, why do I have to learn how to cook? But when I was having, when my husband and I had our son years ago, not that long ago, he's only 5, that we were having discussions about our childcare needs. I was working multiple jobs, he was working, but because my schedule was so irregular and the cost of childcare, so we had some really tough conversations and made a decision that I'll continue to, with my professional career, with my work, and he'll stay home and look after our son. And I cannot tell you how privileged I feel and how thankful I feel to be able to have that option, because I know so many families don't even have that option. So while we're thankful to have that option, I remember getting calls from my own family in Taiwan that they were really worried about this arrangement. They were asking, how is your husband going to feel about that? Are you going to be doing okay? And I was like, what? And I remember when I was running for school trustee, and again when I was running for MLA, I had to have conversations in my local community about, I'm thinking about running for an elected position. And I cannot tell you how many times I get the question from people, and I don't think some of them mean any harm. They may be just caring and they are worried about my family, but I cannot tell you how many times people ask me how am I going to deal with my childcare needs. When I ask my male colleagues in the caucus, that I heard they don't actually get those questions as often as women do. And why is that? So let's talk about that expectation of women, that we have to bear the responsibility of childcare. That's not right. When can we finally reach a point where it's no longer strange for women to return to work and for men to look after our childcare needs? And I think that brings to the question of when can we finally have a universal childcare system that will be able to lift everybody up and to make sure that we have an equitable workforce for both men and women with equal pay and the same career opportunities. And a universal child care system should not be a luxury or a nice to have. It should be a necessity for us to build an equitable society. And that would be the British Columbia that I want to raise my son in. And I have to say, speaking of my son, who is 5-year-old, that sometimes I still struggle a little bit with my childcare struggles, that when he doesn't want me to go to work, he'll always say, "Mommy, why can you not get John Horgan to look after little kids for today?" And I can tell you why he mentioned John Horgan, because he always sees me in photos with a lot of other kids, so he knows I have something to do with childcare. And I also sit behind Premier Horgan in the house in Question Period, and he's probably only the 5-year-old who watches Question Period, because that's how he can see his mommy. But every time he asks that question, I'm like, "Son, you're really thinking ahead, because you're asking a man to look after childcare." But I think that is the reason why we're working hard as a government and with local communities to make sure we can bring a universal childcare system in BC. And we have invested in a significant first 3 years of the plan to build a foundation to universal childcare. But the work that we're doing, while we're taking the lead to bring down childcare costs for the first time in BC's history, that now tens and thousands of families, their fees has decreased, and actually thousands of families are only paying $10 a day childcare. That when we're working on that affordability, and our government is also taking the lead to make sure we're working hard on supporting the workforce, supporting early childhood educators who have been struggling for far too many years, that we know that there's also a crisis with the shortage of spaces. That everyone in this room, if you think about your community and how so many families in your community are struggling to find and access childcare spaces, that some families are putting their kids on over a dozen wait lists even before the child was born, or sometimes have to wait for more than a year or a year and a half or close to 2 years for a spot. You have a role to play, to work with us, to look at the opportunities in your community to build those childcare spaces, because you know your community the best. You're in the best position to respond very quickly to the needs of your community, and you also are in a good position to know where the future needs are. That is why I hope that we'll be working together to look at ways and how can we accelerate the creation of spaces. And of course, I'm from the Republic of Burnaby, as many of you know, that I want to give a shout out to my Burnaby colleagues who are in this room here today. I'll give you a quick example of how the City of Burnaby, the school district and the local government are working together. And currently, the school district are identifying up to 15 or 16 sites to look at creating before and after school and childcare services on school ground, working with the municipality. I'm so sorry, I'm totally biased for Burnaby here. And the City of Burnaby at the same time has actually invested in funding, and already we've got 2 projects approved to build 3 to 5 childcare on school grounds. And I also really want to give a shout out. Another great example is the School District of Victoria. Anyone from Victoria here in this room today? Hey, thank you. They're an amazing example, because I think one thing we can all do is to look at what are the tools that we have in our community. Every development that we have, housing, that we're working closely with Ministry of Housing, working closely with Ministry of Education, senior homes, or community assets and centers, that we can all work together. And kudos to the School District of Victoria, that as soon as we wrote out our new spaces funding, they were one of the first applicants that they got $4.6 million to create over 400 spaces on school grounds. And all those spaces that they're creating are inclusive, are culturally sensitive, that they provide, some of them provide culturally sensitive programming to make sure we work with local Indigenous communities to make sure children have the opportunity to learn about the local Indigenous community. Some of the programs that they're rolling out also have wraparound services to make sure that they can support vulnerable children. And so many parents, because of those 400 spaces, that they can drop off their older kid at the school and the younger kid at the child care at the same time. And the younger child will be able able to be more comfortable with the school environment, and those sort of examples that we will definitely love to see more and more across the province. So of course, I know when I'm talking about those great projects, looking at every development opportunities you have in your community, you probably will ask, where is the money coming from? And that is why we have rolled out a new spaces funding up to $1 million per project, regardless of the number of spaces, to support the creation of childcare spaces in your community. And we're also looking at that funding currently because we know that the construction cost has been going up and there's different ways to create childcare services. So we're also looking at ways that we can provide better enhancement to that project and also to do a multi-project stream. We're looking at signing a memorandum of understanding with your local government to be able to make it as flexible as possible to work with your local government to accelerate the creation of spaces. We're also more than happy to work with you on planning, and I know that recently through UBCM we've rolled out planning grants to 70 communities. Any of you got the planning grant? Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, more needs to come. And we can also add some of your staffing costs or planning costs to the New Spaces project. We are more than happy. We're changing the culture of this ministry to make sure we're proactive. We're going out there, and there were even some childcare spaces that were at risk of losing those spaces that we're able to save through working with local government and school district and local nonprofit to be able to save those spaces. And that's our goal, to maintain current spaces as we continue to create more public projects that will become your community asset that will stay there for generations to come. And I know you're all here because you believe in working together. So this is, while we are taking the lead and the government is definitely, provincial government is taking every responsibility to build a childcare system, I hope we'll be able to work as partners together. And we're really here to learn from you, to hear the challenges from your community as we can continue to accelerate the creation of spaces, to support everybody in our community, because when doing that, you are really helping, again, to create a more equitable society and more equitable community where every child and every family has the opportunity to thrive. And last but not the least, I really want to end by giving you a quote from someone who apparently was voted the best person or the best politician to have a beer with. That's our Premier John Horgan. Yesterday in caucus, he said something really interesting, and it really got my attention. He said, "What is our superpower?" And it's people. It is people in our community. And if you really think about, even for my position as a Minister of State, there would be no position for Minister of State for childcare without the thousands and thousands of families for generations that have been advocating for childcare. And I also want to give shout out to people like Sharon Gregson, childcare advocate, who's also in this room here today. If you just think about how Sharon is able to advocate for childcare without the thousands and thousands of mothers, brothers and sisters and families that's behind Sharon, that's behind the Coalition of Childcare Advocates, advocating for childcare for actually more than one generation, 30, 40 years ago, I see Irene nodding her head, that it's because of all those people coming together to be able to make that difference, to make sure for the first time in history, childcare finally becomes a provincial government top priority. So I look forward to working with you, and I hope I'll get a lot of applications coming from your communities. And last but not the least, I really want to say it's amazing. It's Friday night after dinner and before hot tub, and you're all here listening and talking and having this conversation about childcare. So please give yourself a big hand for being here today. Thank you.